Right, welcome to the FP&AI Podcast, where finance meets the future. And today I've got, again, Anthony and Donovan with me in this podcast. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Rog. Good to be back.
Yeah, good to be back. How's it, Anthony?
Good. So let's just recap what we did in the previous episode. We were talking about strategic planning, setting 3 to 5 year strategic objectives. And typically you do this once a year, you update them once a year. And you do it for the company, and then you go down to each department, one of which is the finance department. And we used a balanced scorecard. So we've got 4 perspectives, and we spoke about, what value do we create for shareholders? That's the financial perspective. And we spoke about some objectives there. If you haven't heard that podcast, no problem. Stay with this one, and then you can go back to the previous one and listen to the financial objectives that we set. And they are the most common ones that we find when doing work with clients. They're not the only ones, but they're the ones that come up often. We spoke about efficiency and we spoke about effectiveness as a finance department, right? Then we went to the next perspective and we spoke about the customer perspective. And we said most of our customers in finance are internal customers. They're typically our colleagues. And we spoke about, the quality and efficiency and giving advice and being effective with your customers. Now, those are the first 2 perspectives. We're dropping into the third perspective today, which is the internal perspective. And we ask ourselves the question, to satisfy our stakeholders, which processes must we excel at? Okay. And as I'm sitting here in front of me, I've actually got the Deloitte's shareholder value framework in front of me. There are about 600 items on that framework that you could do. So we could go through that thing. And I've actually facilitated sessions with Deloitte and that where we had the value framework and we had all these 600 options and, people were choosing them. But actually, if you come back to internal processes, there are about 6 or 7 big themes that people choose from, okay? They are planning, quality, collaboration, speed, efficiency, innovation, governance. These are if I had to group those 600 things into big ideas, it would be these 7 things. There might be 8 or 9, I'm not sure. But these are the ones when I'm facilitating, I try and get people to think along these 7 lines when they're looking at setting objectives, internal objectives, in response to the financial and the customer objectives. Because we're saying to satisfy our stakeholders, what must we do internally in finance? Okay, so I'm going to, again, like we did last time, ask each of you to just, talk through one of those 7. Pick one, and then, we'll alternate, and then I'll come and see what ones we've got left over, and we talk about those few as well. Right, so Ant, if I can maybe kick off with you. What do we need to excel at in finance to satisfy our stakeholders?
All right. So
give me a big item.
What comes to mind is planning, analysis, and reporting. So if we look at that in the context of your internal processes, I think we know as a finance department what we need to achieve, and we spoke about that in our previous sessions. But it is things like accuracy in your financial planning, timely reporting. One of the key things you need to look at is cost effectiveness. How cost effective are we as a finance department in delivering what we need to deliver for the business, for our stakeholders, for our shareholders, etc. And I think the key thing that you've got to think about is internally, how are we achieving those items that we want to get to? Your starting point and what the internal perspective focuses on is very much around your process. And you've got to make sure that within the finance department, you have well-defined processes that speak to what you need to do through the different cycles that you go through. Month end, year end, half year end, budgeting, forecasting, etc. All of the cycles that you go through as a finance department. So it's important that those processes are well defined and that everyone within the department understand the role they play within that process. So when we're building those processes out, it's very important that the role that needs to execute on that process is well defined. the roles that are responsible for each step in the process and each major step in the process are well understood and well defined. Timelines are well defined, so we know when we expect to have certain things done. That doesn't just help us as a finance department, but also helps the business understand what we are doing and when things are happening within that finance department. And it's also important to be clear on what are we achieving on each of those steps within that process. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is the first step in process management is planning the
Yeah,
processes.
yeah,
That's what I'm hearing.
absolutely.
And let's assume we come back from our Christmas break and we arrive on the 1st of January and our year is running from January to December. Give me a sense of how do you plan daily, weekly, monthly, annual? Give me a sense of what those plans would look like quickly. Either of you, Donovan, you can chip in as well.
Yeah, sure.
So I think it does depend very much on what cycles are happening within the department at that point in time. So we know within finance, you've got different cycles that happen. And we've got our business as usual. We're doing every month we're doing a month end. We're doing month end reporting. So it's important that we are regularly meeting and planning around how we're wanting to do that. But if I go back to your example, Roger, in terms of we've just come back, it's now January. We need to close off December. We need to now get our year end in place. First step is get the team together and understand the processes that are defined so that you can walk through those processes early on and make sure that they make sense to everyone. And if need be, that they're tweaked and adjusted based on things that we might know we missed last time or new things that are happening in the business that we need to take care of in the cycle of the year end. To me, that's the essential starting point to make sure everyone understands what they need to do within that process before you even start anything else. Then I think it's critical that you have continuous engagements and meetings around what is happening. So you can decide on the frequency. Maybe during your year end, it's weekly, and then as you're getting closer to the end of your reporting cycle and there's lots of little changes happening, maybe it then becomes daily. And essentially what you want to do in those meetings is you want to ensure that based on your processes, number one, that things are happening as they should. You're giving everyone the ability to say, yeah, I've been able to achieve what I need to. I need to achieve X in the next few days or the next day, as well as giving people the opportunity to say, oh, I'm behind on something or I can't get something right. How do we unblock that? And to provide assistance to that. So it's ensuring we're following the process, but also giving everyone in the department the opportunity to raise any concerns or issues they're having early on in the process through the right mechanisms. A daily meeting's useful, a weekly meeting's useful, and of course, if there's something jumps up, you've got to be able to raise that on an ad hoc basis.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Ant. But no, I just got two comments. One is a bit of a devil's advocate that I want to challenge you with.
Yeah.
Um, and then the first point, I think you would want to start that a bit earlier, won't you? I mean, you wouldn't wait to come just after the New Year celebration and then kick off with the year end. Typically, you mid-December or mid in your 12th month of the year, you're already planning for the year-end activities, albeit the audit and some extra financial reporting. If you're part of a group, there's some extra requirements that comes in. So typically, you will definitely start planning way ahead of time, not just month one of your new year. So I agree with what you're saying, and I just think timing of that would typically happen much
Brilliant.
earlier. To your point on the right time. The devil's advocate thing I want to challenge you with, and would be then typically with our planning, and maybe not in a year-end cycle, but maybe is, but typically in a budgeting forecasting cycle, finance relies on other divisions or business units or departments to feed information to complete that reporting cycle, whether it's production, whether it's commercial, etc., whether it's headcount information. And typically those departments, with respect to our colleagues there, sometimes are not as rigorous because they have their own goals, chasing down sales volumes, for example. And how do we plan for that, um, making sure they are also following that timeline? Now, what's your thoughts on that?
That's good. So just a very quick response to your initial comment. 100% agree. And I just want to say, I talk about process. That whole planning cycle that needs to be done mid-December, what have you, that actually is part of your process. I think that's an important thing to
Yeah,
point out. It's not outside your process. So your process should say, 6 weeks before year end, or 4 weeks before year end, we start planning and etc. So your process should already talk to that, because from previous experience, you would know how long that takes. I'll
yeah,
quickly touch on your second point. I know time is running away, but basically, I think, again, not to sound like I'm repeating myself, that engagement with your external stakeholders, the rest of the business, where you, especially in a budgeting cycle, require information from them to be able to complete that budget. Again, it's important that within your process, you've built in that communication, those communication points early on. So you're communicating early on to the rest of the business around what you need and when you're going to need it from them. And you're probably going to have to remind them as you go along. And I think it's very important to, keep close to the rest of the business as you're going through that cycle. Communicate early, but then just keep in touch with what's happening there. So, get to the point where, oh, I need the information today, and everyone's going, but I haven't started, or I'm only 20% through it. So I think that's quite important. Get it in the process, but make sure your communication is very clear and you're communicating often.
So let's just stay with this planning, because there's a whole lot of stuff coming out, and maybe this podcast is only about planning, because I think we've got a lot of content here. I'm going to change. I thought we were going to get through all 7, but let's just stay with planning a little bit. And some of the questions that come to mind, and I've been in business where budgets like come out of the blue, finance arrive and say, okay, we're doing budgeting next week. How do you avoid that situation? You're in the business, your mind isn't on budgets, right? You do somewhere else, but it comes around every year in August or September. We should know that. How can finance do a little bit more than say, guys, I've got the budget templates, we're starting next Monday? What is a normal process that one should be engaging with business, and what would be appropriate so that it's top of mind by the time August, September comes around?
yeah. If I can come in on that one, Roger, I think it's a good point. I think it's how we frame the budget, or the typical finance type of requirements, because previously, or maybe there's some school of thoughts that's still around, that the budget is a finance deliverable, whereas it's not. It's the business's deliverable and the business's promise to shareholders and stakeholders on what they're going to deliver on. It's the commercial head's promise that I'm going to deliver this margin, this sales volume. The production head's promise, I'm going to deliver this production volume, etc. Finance is just the facilitator to then take those key deliverables, those key promises, and translate it into value. And I think framing that budget is very key to say, excuse me, Mr. Head of Sales, that it's part of your job description to plan, and to plan your target, whether it's a 5-year target, a 6-month target. It's part of your planning, because if you don't have planning, how are you going to develop your action steps? How are you going to develop your KPIs, your marketing plan, your customer plan? Everything comes from that, and that's linked to strategy, like we're talking about. I think it's the framing, and that the business needs to understand, and the culture that needs to understand this. It's much bigger than finance. It's not just, oh, now we're getting to budget and it's sort of a hurdle, and it's preventing me from doing my work. No, budget enables you to do your work effectively, and to deliver your targets.
Also related to what you're saying there, Donovan, it's not directly related to how you communicate, but what's important is also that the business understands that there's ownership and accountability for what they're putting into that budget. If you run the budget in such a way that you gather all the information, but ultimately finance is responsible for managing that budget, reporting against that budget into the future and explaining what's happening, and the rest of the business can sit back and just do business as usual, you're not going to get that buy-in or collaboration from the rest of the business. I think it's important as a business that each department is responsible for the budget that they're putting together and are measured against that as we go through the year. And I think that also builds, if that's the case, people are going to be far more engaged in actually getting a good budget together and planning it and thinking through it, as opposed to just rushing to get something to finance.
Okay, so let me replay a story. We're going to come back to finance because we're talking about the situation where finance rocks up once a year and says, hey, we're doing budgets next month, right? We want to try and avoid that. Let me talk. I worked in a business systems department, and what typically happened is like business would wake up one day and they say, oh, we're creating a new branch in wherever they're going, and they call the IT manager, Tony, we're creating a new branch, and he's like saying, there's no ways, I can build you a new branch with infrastructure and cables and computers and all of that, and businesses, they're so useless, and we ask them for stuff, and they can never, the turnaround's so long, and then Tony would oblige, and then the project would fail, and stuff would go wrong. We then started implementing what we called an IT plan. So once a year, we started going out to the business and we said, okay, what's your strategy? And we found that their strategies weren't documented. So we started encroaching on the strategy conversation and facilitating strategy with the view that we could get the IT requirements out, and then we could put that into the IT plan and work backwards from that. And actually the business really enjoyed that process. Like, it was a time to sit back, and we would do it before budgets because then it still gave them time to do their budget process, etc. We then converted that into, we had a service manager who every single month went and met with the business. It didn't become a once a year activity. Sharon would go out and she would, do relationship meetings, SLA reviews. So there was continuous planning through those CAN meetings or those SLA meetings. And I'm thinking, does finance typically have that? A good finance department will pitch up on bad finance department. Maybe we'll pitch up and say, we need budgets, or we need the BE scorecard, or we need this for stats SA, or we need, it's always something, we need this, and then everyone has to scramble. Is there not a continuous planning that we should be doing with the business? And how do we do that? And have you seen that in reality, Donovan? Maybe I'll start with you.
I've seen it in some shape or form. I think the vision is always to get into that fluid cycle where it becomes business as usual. And I think there's schools of thought out there that I've seen where, especially when you have a production type of business, and people are so operational focused that there are these dependencies that come about on the financial reporting, and you're always having to take people out from their day-to-day to do this. But how they've managed to circumvent taking people out of process is to have these roles called business partners. And yes, it means an extra, maybe a body or two in the organization, but these bodies eventually immerse themselves as support to operations, and it helps the finance team centrally because these business partners get a better understanding of operations, especially the workload and the capacity and availability. And these business partners get so knowledgeable in ops that they are able to then feed the information required by finance centrally. So I think I've definitely seen it. done where it worked in a school where there's these roles called business partners. It is I guess, nice to have if you're able to do it. But if the ROI can be measured on these type of initiatives, then it helps the business immensely. And then you can move to more quality in your reporting, which maybe we'll touch on later in the discussion. So yes, I have seen it in the role of business partners.
Why do you ask whether there's ROI? Surely that's a given.
I think it's a given in terms of, hey, the workload has moved from the process engineer now to fill this CapEx form, for example, and it's gone to the business partner that is facilitating and getting yes. But the ROI is not often measured enough. Typically, an HR exec, etc., will then look, okay, I'm bringing this body, it's X amount to my payroll. What is the ROI? So I think we don't measure it. And I think KPIs or metrics to measure the value that this role is bringing is often not measured. And that's what I've seen. And I think once you can prove the return, then you'll see a lot of finance organograms changing to have your finance controls guys one side, and then your financial business partners almost as another discipline, so to say. Yeah.
And anything to add there?
Yeah, on the ROI question, I think it's an important thing that as a finance department, but I suppose any department in a business needs to always be looking at is, especially when you're offering a service to the business, is the return on investment that I'm offering as a department, is it adding value? Is it worthwhile? Because you can then substantiate what you're doing. So if you bring in the business partners, you can say to the business, hey, the cost is a little bit higher, but the efficiency is there, and it's actually, reducing the cost of your resources, or rather increasing the efficiency of your resources. But overall, I think it's important that we're measuring ROI, because it also will point out things that we are doing that potentially aren't returning an investment, and then we need to question why we're doing it. So that to me is always a critical thing. You've got to measure what you're doing so that you're doing it well, and it's a value add, and you can do look at improving what you're doing. To come back to your first question, just in terms of how we help the business prepare and engage better in that budget cycle. Just a small thing on that is, it's also communicating early. And I've one of the big customers that I've been working with, they're a large corporate with multiple companies and divisions. And one of the things that they do quite well is engaging with all the key partners, business partners, leading up to a budget cycle, a forecast cycle, etc. They engage with them through discussion, but then also they put out a budget guideline document or what have you quite early in the process, so everyone knows
what. So that's planning, basically. You're saying you're planning, and we're coming back to that point.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So they're planning ahead, they're communicating that plan, and giving everyone the opportunity to do their own planning on the back of that, but also ask questions early on around the budget cycle that's coming up. So that also found quite effective in bringing a lot of people together in terms of those cycles.
So when I have workshops with departments and we map out the processes, and we do it in a 5-step methodology, I always ensure that people start with the first step in the process is a planning process. It has to be, whether in marketing or HR or IT or legal or ops, whatever. The first step when you document a business process, the number one thing should be you plan HR, plan marketing, plan sales, plan It should be a given. And it's no different in finance, right? The first thing we should do is plan our processes, plan our month ends, plan our projects, plan our year end, plan our quarter end, plan when we're going to get statistics essay to ask. It's all of those things, right? So it's not limited to finance.
Yeah.
And just a tip of the day, if you ever documented a process, the first thing you start with is planning. The second thing we alluded to, and maybe we can come on in a later podcast, is around collaboration and business partners. And those business partners can be instrumental in taking the finance message out to
100%.
the different areas. And they should be thinking, what are my weekly plans? What are my monthly plans? What are my quarterly plans? They should be thinking that every week, am I in a quarterly plan, cycle? Am I in a year-end cycle? But planning on a Monday morning should be one of the first things they do. And just by the way, now I'm going a little bit off track here, but I was in a training session last week. I had a finance department. We were teaching them how to visualize and analyze and get insights from data. So we said, what do you do when you've got this insight? An insight could be an opportunity or risk. What do you do with that? Well, we go and meet with a business, or we sit with them as business partners and we show them where the opportunity is. And what the CFO said is, often, guys, we don't follow through. We get 80% of giving the insight over to the business, but we don't follow the thing through till we get the ROI back into our income statement or through our cash flow. So he said, we're leaving money on the table. So I said, well, how much money are you leaving on the table? I said, is it a few rand? Is it thousands? Is it tens of thousands? And he said, it is hundreds of millions of rands that we are leaving on the table. And they know it. They've done their work. Finance has done their work by finding that opportunity or that risk. They hand it over to business. Business sometimes drives it because their performance is measured against those opportunities, and sometimes they forget to drive it.
Yep.
Again, the value of a business partner. Imagine you could take that 80 to 90 to 95 to 9. You're not going to get 100%, but imagine what you could do with a finance partner, and that's the value of that finance partner. And they're coming back to the first question I asked you, Donovan, there's ROI all over the place. I don't think we've realized that our data has value in it, and we can optimize probably 10 times more than what we think we can optimize in our processes.
Yeah.
But it has to start with a plan. You have to come back to a plan, and it all starts with a plan. If you don't have a plan, nothing will really happen.
Yeah. It's like that age-old saying, you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Nothing can be truer, I guess. Yeah.
So let's wrap this podcast up with just around robin here. Just some key insights or key things you want to say before we close out the value of planning in a finance department. Donovan, let's start with you, and then I'll wrap up.
Yes, no, thanks, Roger. I think just to piggyback of planning, I think you could also have poor planning, right? And so it's not just planning. You can also have poor planning. And I think that's where we can build on this to say the quality of our planning, right? And also the speed of our planning. And we can then eventually go to say, how good is our planning? And, quality, we can unpack further later on. But one of the easiest things, and not easiest to implement, but a key thing around quality is standardization, right? And then linked to maybe our speed of planning can be the repetitive processes and the repetitive planning process, and how we can perhaps automate that or do it differently. So I think we should also look at how we plan, and whether it's poor planning or good planning, quality and speed. Thanks.
So plan the plan is it's a bit circular in itself, right?
Yeah.
But make it easy for people to plan. I find that people struggle to plan. It doesn't come naturally to everybody. And there's a group of people who are great planners, and for the most part, people struggle because you've got to imagine. You've got to be imagining something when you're planning.
Yep.
Yes, you can break it down into little bite-sized chunks in that, but let's make it as finance. Let's make it as easy as possible for everyone. Make it those templates so simple that people don't struggle with it, and it's not a barrier to, because you don't want to make a barrier that you don't plan.
Yeah, sure.
Is what we're saying.
One quick comment there is planning's, as we've said, critical, but it's also important to remember that planning is continuous. So you can't stop. You've got to keep re-looking at your plans, making them more efficient, fixing them, finding issues that have popped up, make sure they don't happen again, and just replan and replan and replan, because you can always improve. It's infinite. So don't do your planning and then stop doing your planning. Continue doing that.
So I always say there's always upside to planning. If you've got a plan and it's a great plan, well, it's a great plan and you're going to get results, right? If you do a plan and it's a bad plan, your actual data is going to come in and you're going to see a big variance. Oh, we thought this, but that happened. And the moment you see that big variance, well, that was a bad plan, but now it's another opportunity to replan. So even a bad plan is a good thing because it shows you it's a bad plan. But if you do no plan, you won't have the upside and you won't have this correction that you're speaking about of coming back and fixing that plan. So planning all round, whether you do a big plan but some sort of plan is always a good idea. And I think we all know that intuitively, but think about in your world, in finance, what are you going to do this week, this month, this year, this quarter, this year, to improve your planning? Guys, it's been great discussing these things and having you on the show. And I see I've got a new meeting popping up. But if you're new to the podcast, please subscribe, please like it, please share it with your colleagues and put some comments in the comments field so that we can improve the podcast for you and make it more relevant. And we're going to continue in the next podcast. We're going to continue on these internal processes and we can unpack them further. We gave you the 7 up front. We'll maybe put them in the notes, and we're going to cover those 7 key strategic themes in internal processes next time. Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.
Everyone.